The strange thing about humiliation is that it doesn't always hurt the moment it happens. Sometimes it waits. It settles somewhere deep inside you, quiet as dust collecting on an old photograph. Years pass. Life moves on. Faces change. Success comes. Failure comes. But that single memory stays untouched, waiting for one unexpected afternoon to remind you exactly who you used to be. The day I drove my rusted pickup to my ex-wife's engagement party wasn't about revenge. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The truck rattled every time I stopped at a traffic light. The faded blue paint had surrendered years ago to patches of rust. One headlight worked better than the other, and the passenger door only opened if you pulled the handle twice while lifting it slightly. Most people saw an old truck. I saw the first thing I had ever bought with honest money. I rested my hand on the cracked steering wheel and smiled to myself. "You've still got a few more miles in you, old friend." The engine answered with another cough. That felt about right. People think heartbreak changes you overnight. It doesn't. It changes the way you wake up. It changes the silence in your apartment. It changes how long you stare at your reflection before convincing yourself to leave the house. 5 years earlier, I had stood inside a courtroom with my ex-wife, Vanessa, and watched a judge reduce 12 years of marriage into a stack of papers. No screaming, no dramatic accusations, just signatures, cold voices, and one sentence that echoed longer than anything else. "You'll never be more than an average mechanic, Ethan." She hadn't whispered it. She wanted me to hear. "I deserve someone who actually matters." Those words followed me longer than the divorce itself. Back then, I owned a tiny repair shop on the edge of town. The roof leaked whenever it rained. The office coffee tasted like burned rubber. Customers usually paid late. Some never paid at all. Still, I loved fixing things. Engines made sense. People rarely did. Every morning I opened the garage before sunrise. Every evening I locked it after sunset. Grease under my fingernails had become part of my identity. Vanessa used to laugh about it. Not the warm kind of laugh, the kind people use when they're already embarrassed by you. "You smell like gasoline. You'll never move beyond this place. My friends think you're just ordinary." At first I thought marriage meant growing together. I didn't realize some people only love you while they believe you're climbing. The moment they think you've stopped, they start looking elsewhere. 3 months after our divorce, she was already dating Victor Langford. Everyone in the city knew Victor. Luxury real estate, imported sports cars, designer suits, private club memberships. His social media looked like a travel magazine. Paris, Dubai, Monaco. He smiled in every picture. The comments always said the same thing. Goals. Funny word. Goals. Nobody posts the nights they can't sleep. Life has a strange sense of humor. About a year after the divorce, my shop nearly went bankrupt. A supplier vanished with my deposit. My landlord doubled the rent. My oldest employee retired after a heart attack. I seriously considered closing everything. Then, one rainy Tuesday, a woman in her 70s walked into the garage. She drove a vintage convertible worth more than every tool inside my shop combined. She apologized for interrupting my lunch. "I heard you're the only mechanic who refuses to replace original parts unless absolutely necessary." I shrugged. "If they can be restored, they deserve another chance." She smiled. "So do people." Her name was Eleanor Brooks. Over the next few months, she became a regular customer. Not because her cars broke often, because she liked watching someone who actually cared about craftsmanship. One afternoon, she asked an unusual question. "Would you ever consider restoring an entire collection?" I laughed. "Depends how many cars." She answered, 38. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. That conversation quietly became the turning point of my entire life. The restoration project introduced me to investors, collectors, museum owners, people who appreciated precision. Word spread. Soon, wealthy clients from other states shipped classic vehicles to my little garage. The tiny repair shop slowly became something much larger. Not overnight. Not magically. It took years. 18-hour workdays. Missed holidays. Countless mistakes. Countless lessons. Eventually, I stopped repairing other people's dreams. I started building my own company. We designed restoration technology, specialized manufacturing tools, training programs. Within 5 years, our company employed over 400 people. Ironically, I still preferred wearing work boots. My assistant hated that. Her name was Maya, 29, former Air Force logistics officer. Brilliant, efficient, completely incapable of tolerating chaos. She managed calendars the way military generals planned campaigns. Ethan. What? You own a company valued at hundreds of millions. I know. So why are you still driving that prehistoric truck? It still works. It belongs in a museum. It reminds me where I started. She sighed. You also own 3 Ferraris. I know. You never drive them. I know. I honestly don't understand you. I smiled. You don't have to. She rolled her eyes. One day that truck will embarrass you. Maybe. Or maybe it would remind someone else that appearances have expiration dates. The invitation arrived on a Thursday. Elegant cream-colored paper. Gold lettering. Vanessa Reynolds and Victor Langford request the pleasure of your presence. I almost threw it away. Instead, I read the handwritten note attached. Thought it would be nice to show everyone there's no bad blood. Signed, Vanessa. I laughed harder than I had in months. No bad blood. Interesting choice of words. I asked Maya what she thought. She looked at the invitation for exactly 4 seconds. It's a trap. You think? I'd bet my bonus. You always assume the worst. I assume patterns. She leaned back. People who suddenly invite ex-spouses to luxury engagement parties rarely want closure. What do they want? An audience. I didn't answer immediately, because somewhere deep inside, I already knew she was right. Still, I couldn't stop wondering why. Why now? Why after 5 years? Why me? Curiosity has convinced smarter people to make worse decisions. I decided to go. Not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, just to discover whether time had changed us. Sometimes answers cost nothing. Sometimes they cost your peace. I was about to find out which one this would be. Saturday arrived warm and cloudless. The engagement celebration took place at an estate overlooking the river, where white tents stretched across perfectly trimmed gardens. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Valets hurried from vehicle to vehicle. Guests stepped out wearing tailored suits and designer dresses. Conversations floated through the air along with the sound of a string quartet. Then my old pickup rolled toward the entrance. Its brakes squealed. The engine coughed. Several conversations stopped. One valet blinked. Sir, he looked around. I believe deliveries are supposed to use the service entrance. I smiled. I'm here for the engagement. He checked the guest list twice before nodding. His expression politely hid his confusion. As I climbed out, I caught sight of my reflection in the truck window. Dark jeans, clean boots, simple navy button-up shirt. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy, exactly how I wanted it. The whispers had already begun before I reached the garden. Isn't that Vanessa's ex? I thought he disappeared. Didn't he own some little garage? I heard he's still struggling. People love finishing stories they know nothing about. I spotted Vanessa near the fountain before she noticed me. She looked almost exactly the same. Elegant white dress, perfect posture, diamond earrings catching the afternoon sunlight. Only one thing had changed. Her smile no longer reached her eyes. Then she turned, saw me, and for one brief second, I couldn't tell whether she was surprised or disappointed. Ethan. Her voice carried the practiced warmth reserved for strangers. You actually came. I was invited. She looked briefly toward my truck, then back at me. You still drive that thing? I do. She smiled. Not kindly. I suppose some people never change. I looked at the estate around us. I think everyone changes. We'll see. Before I could answer, Victor appeared beside her, extending a confident hand. Ethan. His grip was firm. His smile polished. I'm glad you came. He paused just long enough to glance toward the parking area. I have to admit, I expected you to arrive in something newer. I chuckled. It gets me where I need to go. He laughed loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. I admire optimism. Several people joined in. The laughter wasn't cruel enough to be obvious. Just calculated enough to sting. I let it pass. Because sometimes silence tells people far more than anger ever could. I had no idea that before the afternoon was over, someone else would arrive, and every person laughing at that rusted truck would suddenly forget how to smile. The laughter lingered for only a moment, but Ethan noticed something that years of rebuilding his life had taught him to recognize. Not everyone was laughing. Near the back of the garden stood an elderly man holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. While everyone else smiled at Victor's joke, the old gentleman watched Ethan with quiet curiosity, as though he were trying to remember where they had met. Ethan gave him a polite nod before turning back toward the reception. A waiter approached, carrying silver trays filled with champagne flutes. "Champagne, sir?" "I'm driving." The waiter smiled. "Sparkling water?" "Perfect." As Ethan accepted the glass, Vanessa leaned closer. "You know," she said quietly, "you always did know how to make things awkward." "I didn't realize accepting an invitation was awkward." "You know what I mean." "No," Ethan answered calmly. "Actually, I don't." For the first time, a crack appeared in her perfectly rehearsed smile. Victor quickly stepped between them. "Let's not make today uncomfortable." "I'm not trying to." Victor nodded toward the guests. "Then enjoy yourself." Ethan wandered through the estate, admiring the landscaping more than the conversations. The gardens were beautiful, rows of white roses bordered, stone walkways leading to a glass pavilion overlooking the river. Every detail had been planned with expensive precision. Yet something felt strangely empty. People weren't talking to each other. They were performing for each other. One couple spent nearly 5 minutes taking photographs before either of them looked at the river. Another guest walked around mentioning the price of his watch to 3 different groups. A woman complimented Vanessa's engagement ring while discreetly checking whether anyone noticed her own diamond bracelet. Ethan smiled to himself. 5 years ago, he would have felt completely out of place. Today, he simply felt grateful that his life no longer depended on impressing strangers. "Mr. Carter?" Ethan turned. The elderly gentleman from earlier stood beside him. "I hope I'm not mistaken," the man said. "But did you restore a 1963 Aston Martin for Eleanor Brooks?" Ethan blinked. "I did." The man's eyes brightened. "I knew it." He extended his hand. "Harold Whitmore." The name immediately sounded familiar. Harold Whitmore wasn't known for flashy headlines. He was known among collectors as someone whose private museum housed some of the rarest automobiles in the country. "It's an honor," Ethan said. Harold chuckled. "The honor was mine. Eleanor still won't stop talking about the craftsmanship on that Aston. I just repaired what time had damaged." "No," Harold smiled warmly. "You respected what history had built." They spoke for several minutes about classic engines, handcrafted body panels, and the patience required to restore rather than replace. Across the garden, Vanessa noticed. "So," one of her friends whispered, "why is Harold Whitmore talking to your ex?" "I have no idea." Victor glanced over before dismissing it with a shrug. "Probably asking for directions." But Ethan noticed something else. Several guests had quietly stopped listening to Victor and were now watching Harold laugh at one of Ethan's stories. Respect attracts attention in ways money cannot. Inside the reception hall, the engagement dinner was about to begin. Place cards marked every table. Ethan searched for his name. It wasn't near the front. It wasn't in the middle. It was beside the service entrance, at the smallest table in the room. 3 empty chairs surrounded it. One flickering candle sat in the center. A young server approached, looking embarrassed. "I'm terribly sorry, sir." "For what?" "There was apparently a seating adjustment this morning." Ethan looked around the room. Every other table overlooked either the dance floor or the gardens. His faced a wall. "It's fine," Ethan said. The server hesitated. "It wasn't my decision." "I know." As she walked away, Ethan smiled faintly. "Some people insult you with words. Others use table assignments. The method changes. The intention rarely does." Dinner began with polite speeches. Victor thanked everyone for coming. He spoke about success, ambition, and finding someone who shares your vision. Vanessa followed. I've learned that life is too short to settle. A few guests laughed, knowingly. Her eyes briefly found Ethan. It takes courage to walk away from relationships that hold you back. Applause filled the room. Ethan quietly cut into his meal. The food was excellent. The speech, less so. Harold, seated several tables away, noticed Ethan's silence. He also noticed Vanessa looking toward him far more often than she admitted. Something wasn't adding up. Halfway through dinner, Victor lifted his glass again. "I've always believed," he announced, "that success isn't about where you start." He paused dramatically. "It's about refusing to stay there." More applause. Victor smiled toward Ethan. "And fortunately, not everyone makes the same choices." The room fell uncomfortably quiet. Everyone understood exactly who the comment was aimed at. Ethan slowly placed his fork down. He stood, not angrily, not defensively, calmly. "I actually agree with you." Victor looked surprised. "I do? You said success isn't about where you start." "It isn't." "You're right." Ethan smiled. "The only difference is that I don't think success gives anyone permission to forget humility." The room became still. No raised voice, no dramatic accusation, just one sentence, and somehow it landed harder than any insult could have. Victor forced a laugh. "Always the philosopher." "No," Ethan picked up his water glass. "Just someone who's had enough time to learn what lasts." Before either man could say another word, the distant sound of a powerful engine echoed through the estate. Heads turned toward the entrance. One valet sprinted toward the circular driveway. Another hurriedly adjusted his jacket. Outside, an unmistakable red Ferrari rolled slowly through the gates, its polished finish reflecting the late afternoon sun like liquid fire. Guests immediately began whispering. "Who is that? Another investor? Someone important must have arrived." Ethan glanced toward the driveway, his expression unchanged. Then, almost imperceptibly, he checked the time on his watch. "Right on schedule," he murmured. The Ferrari came to a smooth stop. The driver's door opened. A sharply dressed woman stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. She scanned the crowd only once before her eyes found Ethan. Then, in full view of every guest, she smiled and began walking directly toward the man everyone had spent the afternoon underestimating. Every conversation dissolved into silence. The woman crossed the courtyard with the kind of confidence that couldn't be bought. She wore a charcoal gray suit tailored with understated elegance, carrying a slim leather portfolio in one hand and a set of car keys in the other. The Ferrari's engine clicked softly as it cooled behind her. She stopped in front of Ethan. "Sorry I'm late." Ethan smiled. "Traffic?" A charity gala downtown ran longer than expected. She noticed dozens of confused faces staring at her. "I hope I didn't interrupt anything." Victor recovered first. "Not at all." He stepped forward with the polished confidence that had carried him through countless business events. "I'm Victor Langford." She shook his hand politely. "Maya Bennett. And you are?" "Ethan's executive assistant." A murmur spread across the guests. "Assistant?" Someone whispered, "Executive assistant to what?" Victor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I wasn't aware Ethan worked for a corporation." Maya looked genuinely puzzled. "He doesn't." She turned toward Ethan. "The Zurich investors finalized everything about 20 minutes ago. I thought you'd want the signed copies before Monday." She handed him the portfolio. Without opening it, Ethan nodded. "Thank you. You'll also need to approve the museum partnership before noon tomorrow." Several guests exchanged confused glances. "Museum partnership? Zurich investors?" Vanessa folded her arms. "What company are you talking about?" Maya looked from Vanessa to Ethan. "You didn't tell them?" Ethan gave a small shrug. "It never came up." Maya let out a quiet laugh. "That sounds like you." Victor forced another smile. "So, what exactly does your company do?" "We restore historic vehicles, manufacture precision restoration equipment, and operate apprenticeship centers." Victor nodded dismissively. "So, automotive repairs." Ethan answered calmly. "We started there." Maya gently corrected him. "We've expanded a little since then." "A little?" She smiled. "We have facilities in 4 states now." The silence grew heavier. Someone near the back quietly searched the company name on a phone. Another guest leaned over to see the screen. Eyes widened. Whispers spread faster than before. "I've heard of them." "Wait! They restored that presidential limousine?" "No. That's his company?" Vanessa's expression changed almost too quickly to hide. Not admiration. Recognition. The unsettling realization that she had spent years assuming a story had ended when, in reality, it had only begun. Dinner resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. People who had ignored Ethan now found reasons to pass his table. One man introduced himself as an investment consultant. Another complimented the restoration industry. A third suddenly remembered hearing Ethan's name at an international conference. Ethan answered every greeting with the same courtesy. No sarcasm, no bitterness, just quiet conversation. Harold Whitmore watched from across the room and smiled to himself. Success, he thought, is the world's fastest introduction. Vanessa finally approached while the others drifted toward dessert. "I'd like to talk." Ethan stood. "Of course." They walked onto a stone terrace overlooking the river. The music faded behind them. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Vanessa broke the silence. "You've done well. I've been fortunate." "You always say things like that." "It's true." She studied him carefully. 5 years ago, she had known exactly how to provoke him. Now, she couldn't even guess what he was thinking. "I looked you up once," she admitted. "You did?" "A few years ago. And there wasn't much information." Ethan smiled. "I prefer it that way. You could have told people." "I wasn't trying to impress people." Her eyes lowered. "I underestimated you." "You underestimated more than me." She looked back toward the reception hall. "I thought ambition looked like expensive suits. And now? I don't know anymore." Before Ethan could answer, raised voices interrupted them. Inside the pavilion, Victor was arguing with one of his business partners. Not loudly, but loudly enough that nearby guests stopped talking. The partner held a folder in his hand. "You assured us financing was secured." "It is." "Then why did the bank suspend the release this morning?" Victor glanced around nervously. "We'll discuss this later." "No." The partner shook his head. "We discuss it now." Another uncomfortable silence spread across the room. Ethan looked toward Maya. She met his eyes for only a second. Something about her expression said she already knew more than she was willing to reveal. Victor noticed Ethan watching. For the first time all afternoon, confidence left his face. Not because Ethan had arrived in a rusted truck, not because a Ferrari had followed, but because the carefully polished image he had spent years building was beginning to crack, and everyone important was watching. Ethan slipped his hands into his pockets. He hadn't come hoping to see anyone fail, yet standing there, listening to the strained voices drifting across the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that the biggest surprise of the evening had nothing to do with him. It had only just begun. The music continued playing, but no one was paying attention anymore. Victor excused himself from the tense conversation with his business partner, forcing a smile that fooled almost no one. He walked back toward the center of the pavilion with measured confidence, straightened his jacket and raised his champagne glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "thank you all for joining us today. Every celebration has little surprises, but what matters is keeping our eyes on the future." A few guests applauded politely. Others exchanged uncertain glances. The atmosphere had changed. It wasn't because Ethan had arrived in a rusty truck. It wasn't even because Maya had stepped out of a Ferrari. It was because people had begun questioning everything they thought they knew. As dessert was served, Harold Whitmore approached Ethan again. "I've been meaning to ask you something." "Shoot." "Our museum board is expanding." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "We're looking for someone to oversee a national restoration initiative." "I'm flattered." "You should be." Harold smiled warmly. "The board voted unanimously." "You already voted?" "We did." "And you waited until today to tell me?" "I wanted to ask you face to face." Before Ethan could answer, Harold reached into his inside pocket and handed him a sealed envelope. "I hope you'll consider it." Several nearby guests noticed the exchange. Someone quietly whispered, That's the Whitmore Foundation. Another replied, they only invite the best in the country. Victor overheard enough to understand what was happening. His jaw tightened. Across the terrace, Vanessa watched Ethan laughing with Harold. The scene stirred memories she hadn't expected. She remembered the tiny garage with the leaking roof. She remembered bringing Ethan coffee on winter mornings before their marriage became complicated. She remembered the nights he refused to come home until every customer's vehicle was repaired. Back then, she had mistaken consistency for a lack of ambition. Now she wondered whether she had confused ambition with appearances. It was an uncomfortable thought. Maya stepped beside Ethan. Everything all right? So far. She lowered her voice. I checked on Victor. Ethan looked at her. You checked on him? I was curious. And? The financing issue is real. Ethan frowned. How serious? Serious enough that 3 investors have already left. Ethan sighed. I didn't come here for this. I know. You didn't have anything to do with it? She looked almost offended. Of course not. He smiled. I had to ask. The evening slowly shifted outdoors as lanterns illuminated the gardens. Guests gathered near the river for photographs. Vanessa found herself walking beside Ethan without planning to. I owe you an apology. He looked at her. For what? For believing your value depended on your paycheck. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said quietly, no one gets everything right. I wasn't just wrong. She swallowed. I was cruel. The honesty in her voice surprised even her. I said things no one should ever say to someone they once loved. You did. I've regretted them. He nodded gently. I believe you. She looked at him, searching for resentment. Instead, she found peace. Somehow that hurt more. A sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. One of Victor's assistants hurried across the lawn carrying a phone. Sir, Victor stepped aside. What is it? You need to see this. Victor glanced at the screen. The color drained from his face. No. He grabbed the phone. That's impossible. Nearby guests couldn't hear the conversation, but they could see Victor's composure unraveling. He ended the call abruptly. Within seconds, 2 more phones around the reception began buzzing. Then 5. Then 10. People started checking messages. Expressions shifted from curiosity to disbelief. Harold looked down at his own phone. His eyebrows lifted. Well, what happened? Ethan asked. Harold slowly turned the screen toward him. A financial news alert filled the display. Victor Langford's flagship development project had been suspended pending an investigation into alleged accounting irregularities. Several lenders had frozen funding until the review was complete. Ethan looked back toward Victor. Their eyes met across the garden. Victor knew. Ethan knew. Everyone knew. Yet Ethan didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply folded his phone shut. Maya noticed. You aren't enjoying this? No. Why? Because watching someone lose everything isn't nearly as satisfying as people imagine. Victor walked directly toward Ethan. The crowd instinctively parted. I need to speak with you. All right. In private. Ethan nodded. The 2 men stepped away from the guests toward the quiet edge of the estate, where the river reflected the last colors of the setting sun. Victor stood silently for several seconds before speaking. I misjudged you. So did a lot of people. No, Victor shook his head. I underestimated what kind of man you are. Ethan waited. Victor took a slow breath. There's something you deserve to know. His voice had lost every trace of confidence. I didn't invite you here. Ethan frowned. What? I never wanted you to come. Then why was I invited? Victor looked back toward the reception, where Vanessa stood watching from a distance. Because Vanessa insisted. Before Ethan could process those words, Victor added one more. And that's not the biggest secret she's been keeping. Ethan stared at him. What are you talking about? Victor looked down at the ground. You've spent 5 years believing your marriage ended for one reason. He lifted his eyes again. But the truth? He paused, struggling with the weight of what he was about to reveal. Is far more complicated than either of us wanted to admit. For several long seconds, Ethan simply stared at Victor. The sounds of laughter and music from the engagement party felt impossibly distant. "The truth is more complicated?" Ethan repeated. Victor nodded. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like someone who's suddenly discovered a conscience." Victor almost smiled. "Maybe I have." A cool breeze drifted across the river. Victor rested both hands on the stone railing. "When Vanessa met me, your marriage was already falling apart. I know that much." "No," Victor shook his head. "You know what you saw." Ethan remained silent. Victor continued. "She admired my success. I won't pretend otherwise. But she never planned to leave you for me." Ethan frowned. "Then why did she?" Victor let out a tired breath. "Because I gave her a choice she never should have accepted." Back at the reception, Maya noticed the two men hadn't returned. Harold joined her. "Think we should interrupt them?" "No." She watched Ethan from a distance. "Whatever Victor is saying, Ethan deserves to hear it without an audience." Harold nodded. "He's a remarkable man." "He wasn't always this calm." "No?" Maya smiled softly. "The first time I met him, he apologized to a vending machine after kicking it." Harold laughed. "What changed him?" "Losing everything." Victor spoke quietly. 5 years ago, I was expanding my company." Ethan listened without interruption. "I wanted the property where your repair shop stood." "My garage." Victor nodded. "It sat beside land I needed for a commercial development." "You could have made an offer." "I did. I never received one." "Because it never reached you." Ethan's eyes narrowed. Victor looked ashamed. "One of my executives approached Vanessa instead." Silence. "He convinced her that your business would eventually fail." Victor swallowed. "He also convinced her that if she pushed for a divorce, you'd eventually sell the property." Ethan struggled to process the words. "You're telling me—" "I never asked him to interfere with your marriage, but he did anyway." Victor nodded. "When I discovered what he'd done, the divorce had already happened." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was a coward." Ethan looked toward the river. His old garage. The place where he had built engines late into the night. The place he believed had simply become another casualty of a failed marriage. All those years, someone else had been quietly manipulating events behind the scenes. Not controlling every decision. Not forcing anyone's hand, but nudging them just enough. It didn't excuse anyone. It simply made the past far more complicated. Vanessa approached cautiously. "I think it's time." Victor nodded. "You should tell him." She stopped several feet from Ethan. "I've rehearsed this conversation hundreds of times." "I never did." She looked down. "I believed what they told me." "They?" "The consultants." "The executives?" "They showed me reports saying your business was collapsing. They said you'd eventually lose the garage. They promised I'd spend years drowning in debt if I stayed." She wiped away a tear. "I was scared." Ethan remembered those years. The unpaid invoices, the leaking roof, the uncertainty. "I should have trusted you instead of strangers." "You should have talked to me." "I know." "I didn't." Neither of them raised their voices. Neither tried rewriting history. Some wounds couldn't be erased, only acknowledged. Vanessa continued. "Leaving wasn't my biggest mistake." Ethan waited. "My biggest mistake was believing your worth depended on whether you became wealthy." She managed a painful smile. "I finally understand why people respected you. It wasn't because you became successful. It was because you were the same man before you had anything." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "I appreciate you saying that." She nodded. "I don't expect forgiveness. You already have it." She blinked. "What?" "I forgave you a long time ago." "You did?" "For myself." Another tear escaped before she quietly looked away. Across the lawn, Victor's phone rang again. This time he answered immediately. After only a few words, he closed his eyes. "It's official. The board voted. They're removing me as CEO." No one celebrated. Not Ethan. Not Vanessa. Not even Maya. Failure looked different when it was standing a few feet away. Victor slipped the engagement ring from his finger. "I suppose tonight isn't ending the way either of us imagined." Vanessa looked at the ring, then at Victor. "We shouldn't get married." He nodded. "I agree." There was no dramatic argument, no accusations, just two people recognizing that Appearances had carried them further than honesty ever had. Later that evening, many guests quietly began leaving. The expensive decorations remained beautiful. The river still shimmered beneath the lights. But the performance was over. People had stopped pretending. Harold walked toward Ethan, carrying the sealed envelope once more. "My offer still stands." Ethan smiled. "I think I'd like to accept." Harold extended his hand. "I was hoping you'd say that." As the last cars disappeared down the driveway, Maya tossed Ethan the keys to the Ferrari. "Ready?" He caught them, then looked back toward his rusty pickup parked near the entrance. "What?" Maya folded her arms. "Don't tell me." He grinned. "I'm driving the truck." She laughed. "I knew it." "You can take the Ferrari." She shook her head. "People will think I'm the boss." "You practically are." The old pickup started on the second attempt. The familiar rumble filled the quiet driveway. Maya followed behind in the Ferrari. Guests who remained watched both vehicles leave together. For the first time all day, no one laughed at the truck. Several weeks later, Ethan reopened the original repair shop. Not because he needed another business, because he wanted apprentices to learn where craftsmanship began. The old building kept its worn brick walls. The coffee still wasn't very good. The workbenches were restored instead of replaced. Above the entrance hung a simple wooden sign. "Respect the work. Respect the people. Nothing more. Nothing less." Young mechanics often asked why the owner still drove an old pickup when he could drive almost anything. Ethan always gave the same answer. "If a machine still has a purpose, you don't throw it away." Then, after a thoughtful pause, he'd add, "The same is true for people." Months later, Ethan received a handwritten letter. There was no return address. Inside was a single note from Vanessa. "Thank you for teaching me that success isn't measured by what people admire, but by the person you remain when no one is watching." Ethan folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the top drawer of his desk. Not as a reminder of the past, but as proof that people can grow, even after making painful mistakes. He closed the drawer, switched off the garage lights, and locked the door. As he walked toward his old truck, the setting sun reflected off the faded blue paint. It looked exactly the way it always had. Only Ethan had changed. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving everyone else wrong. It's reaching a place where you no longer need to. If this story made you reflect on the difference between appearance and character, I'd love to hear what stayed with you the most.